Good afternoon, and welcome to the seminar series of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. I am Gaukhar Mukhatzhanova, Director of International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program at the Center, and your moderator for the next hour and a half. I'm going to have to ask my panelists to indicate if they can see me on the screen because I cannot see myself. Yes, excellent. Well, thank you all for joining, and today we will talk about lethal autonomous weapon systems or laws for the various concerns that they raise and the evolving debates in the multilateral fora on the regulation of these systems. We have a great lineup of speakers to address these questions, and I will introduce them shortly. I do want to note, though, that this webinar is part of the series organized with generous support of the Austrian Federal Ministry of European and International Affairs, and we are grateful for this support. So now on to our topic today. Weapon systems with some degree of autonomy have existed for quite a long time and are well known to many of you. Some examples include landmines or air defense systems. However, in 2013, UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, and arbitrary executions formally raised concerns about potential development of lethal autonomous weapon systems that could be programmed to navigate independently, select targets, and destroy them. Deployment and use of such system against humans in particular raises serious ethical and legal questions. And so for the past decade, this issue has been on the multilateral agenda, particularly in the context of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. The past year saw some new developments and initiatives in this regard, and later this month, the Austrian government will host the first international conference on autonomous weapon systems here in Vienna. So how has the international debate on laws evolved? What are the main concerns and proposed solutions and objections to them? What are the goals and expectations for the upcoming conference? To address these and other questions, we have three speakers today, and I will introduce them now in the order of their speaking. First, we will have Anja Dahlmann, head of the Berlin office of the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy, who will review the evolution of the conversation on laws in the context of the CCW and the group of governmental experts there. Then we will have Laurent Gisel, head of the Arms and Conduct of Hostilities unit at the Legal Division of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and he will introduce the ICRC perspective and proposed solutions. And finally, we will hear from Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, who is Director of the Disarmament, Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Department at the Austrian Federal Ministry of European and International Affairs, and the man extremely busy with organizing the conference at the end of this month. And then after they cover their opening remarks, we will have questions both from me and from the online audience, and I will give some more instructions on how to ask questions at the end of the speaker's remarks. And so first we turn to Anja Dahlmann. Please, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I will share my screen, which there we go. Now you should be able to see the full slides, I hope. Perfect. So I will take a few minutes to walk you really briefly through the CCW process of the debate on autonomous weapon systems. And yeah, it's just a few minutes, so I will leave out quite a few things. It's really just a spotlight, but we can discuss details, of course, in the Q&A afterwards. So let me start, surprisingly, at the beginning. The first initiative for this whole debate, this whole process came really from academia and from civil society, starting with Noah Sharkey and the International Committee on Robot Arms Control, then being picked up also by Human Rights Watch, forming finally the campaign to stop killer robots. And they played and still play a really important part in this debate, and also set quite a few frames and narratives that still define the debate as of today. For example, the term and concept of meaningful human control coined by the NGO article 36. So it's really important to have this in mind and see where these concepts maybe come from, better understand and see how they track over time. So giving credit to civil society here. And now really quickly moving on to the actual process in the CCW. There were a few discussions, for example, in the Human Rights Council and other fora, of course, but the main discussion is going on within the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW in Geneva. The whole thing started in 2014 with the first informal meeting of experts, which went on for a few more years, and then was transformed into a more formal setting, a so-called group of governmental experts. It is an open-ended GGE, so all member states of the CCW, this Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, are allowed to take part in this, and many picked this up. Also, civil society, academia, and others are allowed to participate and also to voice their statements in this forum, which is really important to form this discourse and understand this issue of autonomous weapon systems, which is a fairly new one. So it's really helpful to have all this expertise in the room there. So the first part, as I said, was a formal discussion. And then the second part, one could say, was until 2019 with the definition of 11 guiding principles, as they were called. So that was an important milestone in this debate, because state parties were able to find a consensus on these guidelines, guiding principles, which were, to be honest, not very vague, but still very open. Like they stated that IHL applies, which is true, I guess. They say that humans have to stay responsible and accountable, and that weapon systems have to be built in a certain way. And what's really important here is that they put the human really in the center of the debate. So they include this term that human-machine interaction should be further discussed, basically. And that's what shaped the further discussions of the next years in an important way. And they also defined the goal to develop aspects of the normative and operational framework. Brilliant diplomatic term, I would say. So we have this important milestone in 2019. Then, of course, COVID hit. The pandemic slowed down this process quite substantially. It wasn't the only reason it was slowed down, but one important one, of course. And then in 2021, there was quite a problematic situation, one could say, because states parties couldn't find a consensus. So it is a consensus forum. Every state has to be on board, and even one single state can stop the whole process. In this case, there was no consensus on a report in the end, and so without a report, there wasn't a mandate for the next year, and really last-minute states parties were able to find a mandate for the upcoming years, so discussions could go on. So there was a crucial point, a breaking point in there. And to be honest, from there were always a few hiccups in the process. But from there, it kind of went downwards, I would say, because the mandates became really vague and became weaker and weaker every year, basically. And then were really just copy-paste. So there wasn't really a push for an actual framework or for an actual regulation or anything in this process. And that is becoming an issue increasingly. And so last year, they started kind of a, for now, parallel process in the UN General Assembly. There's a mandate that the Assembly will take up the discussion in fall this year on autonomous weapon systems, and we'll see if these processes run in parallel or if the CCW process maybe fails and ends eventually. Not to be too gloomy here, but that is an option, I would say. So what could come out from the CCW debate? In the end, there could be a multilateral regulation of some sort. It could be, in quotes, hard law, like a legally binding treaty, a CCW protocol. It could be soft law, so a political declaration, code of conduct, best practices, something like that. Or there couldn't be any solution, any regulation at all. And if you look at states, then you can find kind of a spectrum on every option there. With some states moving from opposition to any regulation to more like political declarations. For example, the US have introduced a political declaration on responsible AI. Things like that are going on at the moment, so we see how that develops. A brief introduction to the content for a few more minutes. So what's important to notice is that there's a huge divide between the actual debate going on in the room, the statements read out by states parties on the one hand, and the reports, the consensus reports on the other hand. So if you're new to this process and want to get a good impression, I would recommend the chairs summaries. They are usually quite helpful to get an idea of what's going on, has been going on there. At the core of the debate, there's always this human-machine interaction I already mentioned, and the human something, as I said here. So human control or human judgment, really the human role in the targeting process is at the core of this debate. It's also more focusing on the platform, so having, for example, drones in mind there, and not so much the whole infrastructure, which could be an issue when it comes to autonomy weapon systems as well. So it's really platform focused, and it includes the discussion on the life cycle of the weapon system. So it really goes from the design and development to the use of the weapon system, which is really important here, especially if artificial intelligence is included, because you have to be really careful with the design and interfaces of the weapon systems to be able to apply human control later on. I'm sure Laurent Gisel will pick that up later on, I assume. What's not discussed is, for example, the cyber dimension. There is really a parallel discussion going on autonomy and AI capabilities and all that in the cyber realm. AI by itself is not really a part of the discussion. And as I said, infrastructure, command structures, all that are not that much included there as well. So states really focus on a small part of autonomy in weapon systems and autonomous decision-making. Challenges arising from this debate is really, as I said, the human role in the center. That's new. It's quite new for these kinds of discussions. And for arms control discussions, it usually has been implicit at best. The question, what is AI? What is autonomy? How to apply existing arms control tools like verification is an issue. Dual use, this technology, has a huge civilian application. And of course, geopolitics don't make it easier at the moment. So there are quite a few challenges going on there. Nevertheless, states parties were able to find quite a few commonalities, I would say. Many, not all of them, but a majority would say that we need some sort of regulation, even if it's just a political declaration, that the purpose and framework should be international law, especially international humanitarian law. That ethics should be considered in this regard. And as I said already, the human role really at the center of this debate. And then terms like human agency, responsibility, testing, and all these keep popping up there. What could come out from all this? I would say, so to be honest, I don't have high hopes for the CCW process. As I said, it's consensus-based. And there are quite a few states that clearly are not interested in creating this consensus, so it might fail. Eventually, it has been slowing down quite a bit, and still there is a normative effect. So the term is, or issue is discussed at NATO, at national levels. There are initiatives like the Austrian conference in end of this month and all this, and these wouldn't exist if the CCW process weren't going on. So that's really, really important to keep in mind. There is an effect coming from this. And there is also a majority of states who have at least similar ideas of what should be done about autonomy in weapon systems. We can see this in large joint statements by many states that share a common sense of how regulation could look like. So in the end, that is a really optimistic slide here. In the end, there could be a treaty, like an obligation to apply sufficient human control, which would be a provision of autonomous weapon systems. And it probably would be accompanied by best practices, by ideas how training for commanders and operators should look like, manuals and other ethical guidelines and standards. So even if a treaty would be reached by all or some states, it would be probably necessary to add other elements to this, because autonomy in weapon systems is really not just a platform issue, but yeah, it is about military decision making and needs a bit more guidance, probably also with the developing technological opportunities and challenges that will arise from this. And so with this really rough overview, I will end my remarks and hand back to Gaukhar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anja, for this overview and introduction, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points you mentioned and raised later in the discussion, but that's really a good intro to how the debate has evolved so far in the multilateral forums. And then in the beginning, you gave credit specifically to academia and civil society who raised concerns about the development of lethal autonomous weapons systems. And of course, the International Committee on the Red Cross is at the heart of the humanitarian implications of weapons debate. And so I thought it would be really good to hear from ICRC about the specific concerns they have and the proposals they have made, because they've recently also submitted a set of recommendations to the UN Secretary General for inclusion in the report pursuant to the resolution that you, Anja, mentioned. And so with that, I'm really glad to have Laurent Gisel join us. Please, Laurent.
Thank you, Gaukhar. It's a privilege to take part in this webinar today with Anja and Alexander to discuss one of the most pressing humanitarian priorities that looms over the future of warfare and threatens us all. So thank you very much to the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation for organizing this webinar and for your kind invitation. So let me start with what we see today in current conflicts. We understand autonomous weapons as weapons that select and engage targets without human intervention after activation and launch. Weapons that meet those criteria or this definition already exist and have been used in conflicts since decades. But reports of use of autonomous weapon systems in current conflict, which may be challenging to verify, but they indicate quite disturbing trends in the sense of autonomous weapons incorporating increasingly complex technology and an expanded operational parameters, so a greater range and mobility and a broader range of targets. And the development of a future system that is being carried out and advocated by the defense industry show that such evolution will continue and further multiply the type and the circumstances of use of autonomous weapons. So in a way, this underscores the urgent need for the international community to act to address the risk posed by the current trends in the development of these weapon systems. The development and proliferations of autonomous weapon systems have the potential to significantly change the way wars are fought and contribute to global instability and heightened international tensions. They create a perception of reduced risk to military forces and to civilians, and may therefore also lower the threshold for engaging in conflict, inadvertently escalating violence. And in that sense, it's very important to realize that the issue of autonomous weapon systems development and use is not only relevant for states that are developing such weapon system, it's relevant for each and every state and their populations. So our concern fundamentally is about the fact that the unconstrained development and use of autonomous weapon system risk a loss of control over the use of force. Sure, warfare is always messy and always horrible, but autonomous weapons add an additional layer of unpredictability and brings new danger for civilians and combatants because of this unpredictability. I said those weapons fire themselves based on data received through sensors after having been activated. Legally, that makes it difficult for a user of autonomous weapons to comply with international humanitarian law. Let me take an example. How can a user be reasonably certain that an attack will not cause excessive incidental harm, which would be prohibited by the prohibition of disproportionate attack, when the user does not know exactly what, where, or when the weapon will actually strike. Ethically, it's also raised lots of concerns. Ceding life and death decisions to machine sensors and software is a dehumanizing process that undermines our shared humanity. So current practices show that the use of these weapons, current military practice shows that the use of these weapons have been limited to very specific and well-constrained situations. The current evolution and trends in the development and use of these weapons beyond such scenario raise concerns over maintaining human controls over the use of force when using such weapons. Now, we have been very encouraged by certain key aspects of the multilateral discussion, and Anja already provided many details that I will not repeat, but I will add a few points from our perspective. First of all, let me commend states for having clearly reaffirmed from the start that international law, and in particular international humanitarian law, apply to autonomous weapons systems. And by applying, I mean that they restrict their development and use. That seems obvious, but we know from other debates on new technologies of warfare that actually it's not that obvious, so it's worth underlining here. Then I think another very positive point to draw from the ongoing debate on autonomous weapons is the very strong acknowledgement by states of the serious challenges and concerns raised by autonomous weapon systems, and therefore the urgent need for action. This was explicit in the milestone UNGA resolution last year that was started by the first committee and was endorsed by the vast majority of states, 164. It's also apparent in the fact that around 110 states in how we can have assessed and now support new legally binding rules on autonomous weapons system to address these challenges and concerns. Homing in on the GGE that Anja discussed a lot, we see it as positive that the group last year set out a structure of prohibitions on certain autonomous weapon systems and restrictions on the remainder. Such a structure could form the basis for new international rules. However, what's needed from our perspective now is more specific and practical regulations to effectively address the various humanitarian, legal, ethical, and security concerns raised by autonomous weapon systems. Put otherwise, more specificity on what do we mean by ensuring that control over the use of force is retained by the humans. So that's why we have submitted since May 21 that we've been calling for new legally binding rules. That's not something that we do often or lightly, but we think that new legally binding rules are necessary to clarify how existing law constrains the design and use of autonomous weapons and to address the humanitarian risk and fundamental ethical concerns that they raise. We have recommended states to prohibit unpredictable autonomous weapon systems. That is based on the requirements that the user must anticipate and limit the effects of the weapons that they use according to international humanitarian law. So unpredictable autonomous weapon system raised huge concern in terms of the ability to be able in compliance with the law. We also call on states to prohibit anti-personnel autonomous weapon systems, so those that would be designed or used to target persons directly. They also raised huge challenges in terms of compliance with international humanitarian law, but also very serious ethical considerations that states have also recognized are raised by autonomous weapon system, and that's those that target persons that raise the most ethical considerations. Of course, heightened protection for humans compared to objects is fully in line with how the international community has regulated the use of weapons. And we see that from the prohibition of exploding bullets to blinding laser weapons or anti-personnel mines and all the prohibitions of those weapon systems. The other autonomous weapon system, because our recommendation is not to prohibit them all, only those two categories that I mentioned. So the other autonomous weapon system should, in our view, be regulated within limits and requirements, notably in terms of the type of targets, the duration, geography, scope, type of munitions, number of engagements that the system can undertake. Of course, limits on the situation of use and requirements for effective supervision, deactivation, and neutralization, so human-machine interactions. So as was mentioned earlier, we have made submissions to the UN Secretary General consultations in that respect. That submission is public. We have tried to provide more specificity and actually concrete elements on how those prohibitions and regulations could be expressed in international instruments, because we believe that now is the time for the international community to chart the way forward. And we at the ICRC stand ready to support states and as they work towards this goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a great overview and the discussion of the ICRC perspective on this. And later on, I think we'll be able to put in the link to the ICRC submission to the UN Secretary General's report. And before we turn to our last speaker, and I would draw your attention to the announcement in the chat that if you'd like to pose a question to the panelists, please submit your question using the Q&A function. Don't use the chat or for it, and no need to raise your hand. Just post your question, and we'll try to get to all of them. Those of you following us on YouTube, please send your question to the events@vcdnp.org account. And so with that, I'm going to turn to Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, who is very busily organizing the International Conference on Autonomous Weapon Systems at the end of this month. And so we'd like to hear from you, Alexander, about the rationale for the conference, for Austria hosting it, what the program is going to cover, and what are your expectations of the outcome, if any, of the conference, whether you see it as a start of some kind of process, a parallel one to this GGE, or something different. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Gaukhar. Can you just confirm that you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, I start also by thanking the VCDNP for organizing this discussion, which is of course very timely for us under 2 weeks from the conference that the Austrian Foreign Ministry is organizing on this issue. And as you rightly said, I'm extremely busy at the moment. The conference is entitled Humanity at a Crossroads, Autonomous Weapon Systems and the Challenge of Regulation. And I think that partly already answers the main concerns and the motivations. The 3 questions that you asked me to address is the main concerns and issues regarding the development of autonomous weapons and our perspective. And secondly, the rationale of Austria's approach to this, including the Anja resolution, and then a little bit more specific about the conference. So I think the title of the conference, in a way, underscores the motivation behind it. Of course, it's a moot point to say that artificial intelligence will impact us very, very seriously, and of course also in the military domain. And like everywhere else, many of these developments will be positive, will be beneficial, will probably be fascinating. Of course, the development of autonomous weapon systems. But we need to be open to the positive changes, but we need to be even more clear-eyed about the risks that these systems bring. So especially, of course, when it comes to the most profound question, which is deciding over life and death. We have a speed of technological development in artificial intelligence like we've probably never seen before, and therefore also a weapon system development speed like we've never seen before. And as Anja has pointed out, this timeline that she gave us from 2014, since we started talking about this, I think never really in history has this discrepancy between how the technology is driven forward, by how many people, by the resources behind it, and the speed behind it. Never has the discrepancy been bigger between that development on the one hand and the sort of international response, the diplomatic multilateral response to it. So we are really completely lacking behind. We're talking about it now for 10 years, while what's going on in the realm of developing this is absolutely mind-boggling. So of course I agree very much with what both Anja and Laurent said. Of course the IHL dimension is very much at the center of this. It's hugely significant, but the significance of this issue and why we think it's a crossroads for humanity is that it also goes beyond IHL. It really raises extremely profound ethical issues. What is the role of humans in the use of force? What can we let algorithms do? And what roles and responsibilities must humanity never, on no account, delegate from humans to machines? Also, what does the development of autonomous weapon system mean for the concept of law and accountability and for human rights? I mean, humans and human responsibility is at the center of law. So what does this mean in concrete terms when we talk about autonomous weapons? So I think we are exactly at a crucial inflection point where these questions are really very, very pertinent for a future where machines and algorithms may dominate also armed conflict and warfare, and where we, of course, need to address these questions in a much more broad way than this very good but sort of rather obscure group of governmental experts in Geneva with a few dozen people talking about it. It's no match compared to the development that's going on outside. So I think what concerns us is, of course, that that the decisions that we take now, or the decisions that we don't take now, will have extremely profound repercussions for humanity as a whole and for the future of armed conflicts. So I think we are really at a inflection point here. So that's, of course, also partly the rationale for Austria's approach, which brings me to the second question that you've asked. So we have been, I think, very actively engaged in these discussions in the group of governmental experts since the beginning. Our minister has spoken about this issue almost immediately after he took office. And we absolutely acknowledge that discussions in the GGE have been very important, have been significant, have helped, I think, participants there to conceptualize the issue. We've, of course, had last year, I remember, excellent steer by the chair from Brazil. Now the ambassador of the Netherlands has put out a very good program of how to structure the discussions. But I think it's the geopolitics really that is the stumbling block there. It's one of the signs that were on the slides from Anja. I think it's the most significant one. I think in many ways it's almost tragic that a development that's so fundamental like artificial intelligence, and of course thereby also the development of autonomous weapon systems, takes place against a backdrop where the geopolitics is so difficult, where we have seen complete loss of trust. So at the time when political leadership and international cooperation to deal with this fundamental change for humanity is most urgently needed, it's largely lacking, certainly in the field of security, due to the breakdown of trust among some actors. So our approach is that we are convinced that this is really an extremely significant issue for the entire international community. It is about compliance with IHL, but it's about a lot more. And that the dynamics in the GGE, as was pointed out, with the strict application of consensus role, is such that we have serious question marks whether we'll be able to move in the CCW in a way that's commensurate with the urgency of the issue. I agree entirely that it has a norm-setting effect, that it is important, it stimulates the discussion, it has brought the issue on the international agenda, but everybody who sits in the GGE also knows, and I think it was pointed out by Anja, is that there are some actors in this group who simply have no interest to move forward and have all the procedural tools to stop us from making progress. And I think that is a serious political question that's in front of us. Can we move forward? Of course, ideally, all the international community, every single state rallies behind an issue and we agree something and the consensus is strong, but we are not in a time like that. This consensus doesn't exist. It doesn't exist on hardly any issue, and it certainly doesn't exist on almost any of the arms control or security related issues. So the political question is, what do we do productively in a moment like that, when we will not have consensus and when it's unlikely to be around the corner? Are there things that still can be done? And I think from our perspective, are there things that even have to be done, not despite the geopolitical tensions, but really because of them? Because if we don't manage to address this issue in a normative way, I think it's not a very big stretch to say that we will end up in a few years in a situation that's far worse. So this was really the motivation why we initiated this resolution in the General Assembly to have a broader discussion. The CCW, the convention in Geneva, has about 120 states parties. We took it to the UN, that it's really on the agenda of the entire international community, also underlying the fact that this issue may be currently relevant for a few countries that develop them, but it's only a very short amount of time until it will be a huge issue for the entire international community. So what the resolution tasks operationally is we have mandated the Secretary General to produce a report seeking the views of member states on the issue of autonomous weapon systems, and also inviting other stakeholders to share their views. So we hope that this report really will be a strong document underscoring very clearly the overwhelming support of the international community for addressing this issue with urgency and for making progress on the normative framework. From our perspective, from the Austrian perspective, it is international law. So we strongly support the call from the Secretary General who has challenged the international community to come up with rules with international law by 2026. And so we tasked the Secretary General for a report, and the conference that we're organizing, I'm coming briefly to the third question, is very closely linked to the resolution. So we want to frame the discussion on autonomous weapons very broadly, very much the legal dimension, the human rights dimension, very much the ethical aspects, but also very much the security related aspects, and what it would mean for our societies if we cross this threshold. There are also really significant security policy aspects at play, the risk of arms race, of an AI, autonomous weapon systems arms race. These weapons will become the weapons of choice for terrorists and non-state actors, so they're very important issues to talk about. So we want to tackle at the conference in Vienna all the aspects around this debate that would have to be dealt with in any future comprehensive legal instrument dealing with autonomous weapons. We have excellent experts here. We have a high-level part at the start of the meeting, which will discuss these issues from a political perspective. The program of the conference is now finalized, so I asked Gaukhar to put in the chat the homepage address. So that is now looking good. We have over 120 states who will come to Vienna, so I think we are successful in demonstrating that this is an issue that really is of global importance. So the goals really is to raise the political momentum, to underscore the urgency of the issue, to create pressure, to work on new rules, international law, essentially. And as I said before, the key question is what can be done in a situation that's as difficult as the geopolitics are right now. We will, there is not going to be a negotiated document. Austria will produce a chair's outcome document summarizing the points that have been made by the expert panels. We will submit this to the Secretary General as input to the report. We will do outreach to states to use these points or to sign up to these points because, of course, any report of the Secretary General is only as strong as the number of countries that have submitted views. So really, that is the focus of the conference. I realize I've already gone a bit over time, so I stop here and thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you especially for giving sort of a broader perspective and putting in a bigger picture and explaining the motivations behind the conference. We have quite a number of questions coming in online, and we'll get to them, but I thought I would also have some follow-up questions to our speakers, and starting with Anja to dive a little bit more into this problem that you said that GGE cannot quite move forward. You don't have very high hopes for the GGE because some actors are not interested in progress, and Alexander also talked about it. What has been the nature of objections to moving further with the GGE process? So what is at the crux there? Is there disagreement over the need to negotiate something? Is it a disagreement about how to define things? Or so what's been the nature of key objections? Is it just politics, or are there some substantive arguments that you would like to highlight?
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's basically all of the above. So starting with the question, do we actually need a new regulation? Do we need new international law to grasp and to grasp this new technology? So there are a few states that say we don't need any new regulations because IHL really covers it already with the broader rules of international humanitarian law, where I would say, sure, of course, IHL is there, but we need to understand how to actually apply it to this new technology. What does it really mean here? And I mean, discussing human control and all that really shows that it's necessary to have this debate and to set a few rules, as ICRC, for example, did and proposed already. One question, of course, is the definition of autonomous weapon systems, because usually you would probably start a treaty with the definition of what you actually want to prohibit. And with autonomy in weapon system, it's much harder because it's not just one weapon system and not just one platform that is tangible, but it's really about military command and structures and decision making, which is harder to grasp, and it's a distributed system. And so the working definition that has been floating around of autonomous weapon system is one with autonomy in its critical functions, meaning selection and engagement of targets, is really a good way to go, I would say, putting the human role in the center of the debate and not getting stuck on technical issues there. And then, of course, also geopolitics play into this. states that just don't want to see a regulation there, states that see a huge military benefit coming from autonomy in weapon systems and don't want to tie their hands on this. So really quite a few challenges coming together here. Some of them are easier to be resolved than others, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question here, and that's something I also wanted to pose, maybe to Laurent, or if other speakers want to pick up, about sort of the nature of the legally binding instrument. Should it be a standalone treaty, or do you think it's something that could be subsumed under the existing instruments as another protocol under the CCW, or something under the Geneva Conventions, if that at all is an option?
Thank you to allow me to expand on that a little bit. The key from our perspective is that it's legally binding, and whether that's through a protocol to the CCW or a protocol to the Geneva Convention, as you mentioned, or another form of instruments, I mean, the type of instruments, it's not the most important for us. What is critical, we believe, is that it's legally binding, as opposed to soft law instruments like code of conduct that Anja mentioned also in her presentation. And legally binding instruments provide legal stability, they provide clarity, they provide certainty that political declarations don't. I don't want to undermine political declarations, they might also be important, but when it comes, they are also important, in particular when it comes to the use of weapons. And I say next week we'll discuss a political declaration in Oslo on explosive weapons in populated area that we believe is also very important. So it's not to say that they are not important, but with regard, when we talk about the development of weapons, not only their use, but the development of weapons, the international community has chosen the path of having legally binding instruments. And we believe that for good reasons, precisely in terms of the long-term value of the certainty and the clarity that it brings. It's of course also very often binded together with regulations or restrictions on use. But that's the main importance, the critical aspect from our perspective is that it's legally binding. Now, what is, as I was mentioning earlier, we have now counted around 110 states who are in favor of that through various declarations, whether that's in the CCW, through submitted documents, through statements, also through regional declarations. There have been declarations, notably the Belen Communiqué and the CARICOM declarations, that both advocate or promote or encourage states and call for legally binding instruments. There are other regional processes or events or conferences that have taken place and are going to take place in Luxembourg and Manila last year, in Freetown tomorrow. So those regional events are very important. But in terms of the key goal for us, it's a legally binding instrument, and building on what Alexander mentioned, we also fully align with the 2026 deadline that the Secretary General has mentioned. That's also part of the joint communiqué that the President of the SRC and the UN Secretary General have issued last autumn, because we believe it's urgent. And to achieve that by 2026, I believe that negotiations need to start urgently. And I mean negotiations in terms of negotiating a legally binding instruments, diplomatic negotiations, wherever they take place, that's for states to decide. But turning to negotiations after the 10 years of discussions that have taken place in the CCW that Anja mentioned, we really need to have this courageous decision by states to move forward in that respect and take that step. And in that respect, the Vienna conference that is in a couple of weeks and that has been mentioned, and we view that as instrumental also to bring that to the broader community, because the discussion have been so much in the CCW, but the CCW is not universal. So that's one of the critical value of the UNGA resolution of last autumn, is that this is universal, and of the conference next week to make sure, sorry, in 2 weeks, to make sure that all states are equipped, informed to make submissions to the UN Secretary General. As I have said earlier, we believe that's an issue that concerns every state, not only those that are potentially developing or considering using those weapons, but precisely those that might be affected by the use of those weapons, or that might be affected by the proliferation of those weapons.
Thank you. My next question is to Alexander. It's sort of a combination of several ones that are in the Q&A, and then the one that I had. The way you described your rationale and the composition of the upcoming conference, and something that Laurent just mentioned right now, sort of the involvement of potentially affected communities beyond sort of the strictly governmental discussion in the CCW. There are certain parallels between this and what was the humanitarian initiative on nuclear weapons. And so the natural question from there is do you also view this as a precursor to a negotiating process that could be under the General Assembly mandate or completely separate? And have you received any pushback in that regard to organizing this kind of questioning of where this could lead, where this could be taken?
Thanks a lot. First, if I just make a very quick comment to the 2026 date that the Secretary General, with the support also of the ICRC President, has sort of challenged the international community. I don't believe that that's an arbitrary date. We have been talking about autonomous weapons for many, many years, that this is a chance to do something preventatively. And I think the window is almost closed, if it hasn't closed already. But I think by 2026, if we haven't actually moved forward on this issue, it probably will be closed. So I think it's not arbitrary. I think it's really important to underscore that. On that question, on the second question, the parallel, I think, is to the humanitarian initiative is that we need to have a much broader discussion about all the implications of autonomous weapon systems. Similar as we felt that on the nuclear weapons debate, it was important to have a broader discussion. So in that sense, there is a parallel. I don't think the parallel goes much further than that. Like Laurent said, I think also the position from Austria, and I think from most other countries who have spoken out for the need for international rules, we are completely agnostic how and where. It doesn't really matter. It will probably be a combination of legally binding steps and non-legally binding steps. Can it be sort of the one treaty that deals with everything? Will it be a patchwork? We don't know. From our perspective, it's absolutely essential that specifically the human responsibility and human control are dealt with in an international legally binding instrument. How and where, we would be entirely flexible. What I said in my introduction is that on the experience of the past few years, there is an element of skepticism to what extent states that simply don't want to move forward will allow us to move forward in the CCW. And if that's the case, as is unfortunately very frequently apparent, then I think the difficult political question is, so what next? But I think we are just as flexible on that issue and as everybody else. I think we need to have it at the much higher at the political agenda, and if the political momentum is there, we will find a way. Yeah. I'm a bit hesitant to agree with the argument that discussions can only take place in the CCW because that is limiting it and gives actually all the control to the countries that are not interested in moving forward. So I think that's where we are, and the key political question, I think, is what can we do in a situation that we are in, given the constraints that we see and the unlikely global consensus on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions here having to do with the initiative on the responsible military AI or responsible use of AI in military domain. And one question in particular is whether there's a link between whether the upcoming conferences is linked to that, and also your reflections on the US initiated political declaration on the responsible use of AI. How do you see these issues being connected, and what's your reflection on the declaration? And that's really to any of the speakers, whoever wants to go first. Perhaps Alexander first, because of the link to the conference.
Thanks. I'm happy to answer that. Austria has signed the political declaration. It's a much broader process. It's really about artificial intelligence in the military domain, of which autonomous weapon systems is one aspect, but there are many other aspects. And I think that's also the utility of this process. It really talks about any military dimension where artificial intelligence will play a role in the future. So I think it's much broader, whereas on the autonomous weapon system issue, the discussion has moved on over the past 10 years. We are further conceptually. So there is no formal link at all. But of course, artificial intelligence is the aspect that combines the two. We think it is important that the US is doing this, is facilitating this discussion, and will certainly will help to understand all the dimensions of artificial intelligence in the military domain. But on the autonomous weapons issue, from our perspective, it's a separate discussion, it's a separate process, and it's much further advanced in the international discussion than what is really happening in the US political declaration framework.
Thank you. Did Laurent or Anja want to weigh in on this? Yeah, Anja, please.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Right, so in general, I would agree that it's important to have a discussion on the broader application of AI in the military realm, because it's really picking up speed. Discussion is necessary. At the same time, looking, for example, at the US declaration, it's really just the bare minimum of responsible and safe development of AI and what you would expect actually states to do if they introduce a new technology. So it's good to write this down and have a common understanding, but it's definitely, it's really the baseline. And what is necessary is to apply it to autonomy in the critical functions, to have the details in there, because yeah, it's a much more specific point, as Alexander said, and we are further conceptually with this. And if you look at scenarios for autonomy in weapon systems, you will notice that it gets really complex, and you need a lot of details. And a broad political declaration is definitely not enough. Regarding the link to the CCW or to laws debate in general, of course there isn't a formal link, but I'm a bit afraid that it will be linked, because states might say, well, we signed this political declaration, responsible AI, we're all good, and that's it. We don't need a further discussion on autonomy in weapon systems. And so it's important to keep this separate, and to be really clear that we need more details and rules for autonomy in weapon systems beyond responsible AI.
Thank you. Laurent, did you want to come in as well?
Echoing a number of points that both Alexander and Anja mentioned, we also believe it's important to separate the two, to add an illustrations, artificial intelligence, and in particular, machine learning algorithm within autonomous weapon system increase the concerns that we have with regards to the loss of human control over the use of force. In particular, if through machine learning algorithm, the weapons change the manner it operates after having been launched or even after having been tested and validated by the states through a legal review of new weapons and weapon systems. This being said, autonomous weapon system in the way we recommend to or we submit to define them, and that I mentioned and Anja also mentioned, and that's the main, even if there are many definitions, that's what the states are slowly coalescing around, meaning autonomy in the critical function of selecting and engaging targets. That's not necessarily relying on AI. You might have autonomous weapons that do not rely on AI whatsoever. And the primitive example of autonomous weapon system is an anti-personnel mines, which have no AI systems in it at all, but fits that definition. So that also underlines the importance of keeping the two separate. The discussion on autonomous weapon system have advanced a lot, as Alexander mentioned. We need to build upon this and now to move to negotiations. The broader discussion on AI is a more recent one, is a much broader one, covers many aspects, might have implication for autonomous weapon system, but also for decision support systems, which precisely are not autonomous weapon system, but that are also very important, as I think we are all aware, and that's something we also are working on the challenge that AI in decision support system create. But for the clarity and enabling moving forward, we really encourage states to keep the two things separate, even if both have values.
Thank you. Question I wanted to pose as well is Laurent, you emphasized the need for regulation is based not only on the need to prohibit the use, but also regulate development. And we talked about the role of non-state actors in terms of in positive terms, like the civil society raising awareness, as well as the risks of non-state actors of the criminal or violent variety getting hold of these weapons in the future. So I want to ask about the developers. Where is the industry in this conversation, if at all? Is it really just not kind of the government and academia, government and IHL community? Does the industry come in here and already, and whether there's a plan to bring them in more into this conversation through the process, such as the upcoming conference? I take volunteers to answer this.
Sorry, I had the impression that the question was for me, so I'm happy to give it a go. I
Absolutely.
don't know for the participation in the conference. Alexander can probably a better place to respond on that last question. But the position of the industry, I think it's critical to have in mind what Alexander mentioned earlier, is that the window is closing. Technological development by the defense industry is occurring now. So in that sense, they play a key role in developing what could be future weapons. And it's for the international community now to decide whether the international community want to set the limits and decide what it deems unacceptable, or whether the international community wants to let the technological development drive what will be developed. Because let's be clear that once it is developed, it's much harder to go back if we identify that what has been developed is actually unacceptable. So doing that preventively is critical, and we have example in the history of disarmament that speaks to that very much. Everybody agrees that, we certainly and many other underscore that the Ottawa Treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Anti-Personnel Landmines, is a huge humanitarian success in terms of decreasing the number of victims. This being said, it would have been an even broader humanitarian success if it had been done before the industrial development of mines, like blinding laser weapons have been prohibited. We speak very little of that protocol, but it's actually so successful, and that's why we speak of it so little, because it had been done preventatively. Once the weapon is there, it's so difficult to get rid of it. Mines, an example, nuclear weapons is another example. There are many factors that comes into play. Now, so that's an important part of what the industry role is. On the same hand, the industry, or at least within the industry, there are many voices that are asking and expecting the international community to set what are the limits, to guide then what is unacceptable in terms of development, meaning therefore also what the industry can develop with more confidence. And again, to take the example of blinding laser weapon, that prohibition have not prevented the development of anti-material laser weapon systems by the military, or of course the development of laser for peaceful purposes. It just gave the industry the direction, including the military defense industry, the direction of what the international community deemed unacceptable. And I said there are calls by the industry or by many individual industry to have that guidance being given by states.
Alexander, do you want to comment about the involvement of industry in the discussion?
Thanks a lot. It's of course a very, very crucial issue. I think the first thing to say is that the diplomatic discussions towards regulation are not technology hostile or industry hostile. I think it's very clear these developments are unstoppable. They are coming. It's just to regulate them in a way to harness what's positive and to try to minimize the risks of what's negative. So it's ultimately very much in the interest of industry as well, because of course there are investments, and if they take place in a situation where the legal framework is unclear, that might be bad for the companies themselves. So we hear actually quite frequently from companies, challenge, give us rules. We want to know what are the rules. So I think that's important. It's important to include them. We specifically included them in the invitation to submit views to the Secretary General's report. I think that was one of the steps that we tried to do. We of course tried to involve them and invite them to come to the conference in Vienna as well. So it's not something that should be construed as being we want to stop industry or we want to stop companies. It's to define rules which ultimately is in the interest also from the companies and from industry that is driving this technology. Thanks.
Thank you. To continue the conversation about the potential for a legally binding instrument, and there are several questions in the Q&A kind of asking what would be the effect of that if some of the key actors who are developing, who are sort of the main players in the geopolitics of it at the moment, if they are not joining and they might be actively opposed as well. There's a question kind of likening this to ATT, whether ATT is effective and whether any kind of future treaty on laws would suffer from kind of the same drawbacks. I'm happy again to take volunteers to address that. Okay, Alexander, since you have the floor.
I'm happy to take a first go, but I'll of course be interested to hear what Anja and Laurent have to say. I think this is an argument that is frequently brought forward. And I think it is, as I said, it is very unlikely that we will be able to move forward with really everybody. Or if we were to move forward with everybody, it would probably be at an extremely low level with very little normative effect. So that is the big political question in front of us, I think. Is the fact that international consensus eludes us reason for not developing new rules with those who can and those who want? Or is it reason to not do it because not everybody is party to it? I think that's the key question. It's a very difficult question, obviously. The answer that I would give to that question is that if we are not developing any rules, we are going to be in a far worse situation in a few years from now. So I don't dismiss the argument at all of those who make the point that not everybody is on board, which is absolutely a valid point to make. But I think it is still necessary to try to develop this normative framework, and maybe precisely because the situation is so challenging that we have to try. So it's not a perfect answer. Of course, it would be best if everybody says, yes, this is what we do, and everybody signs on the dotted line. But we are not in a world on security-related issues that works like that. So what is the consequence? What conclusions do we draw then from it? Is inaction the right answer, or is trying to invest into or setting norms, is that the right answer? There's no ideal way forward. It's a value judgment.
Yeah,
Anja?
sure. I fully agree. And picking up this, ambiguity or this not ideal but still best solution we might have is to move on with some sort of regulation. It will be incredibly difficult to verify this because you can't really count autonomy, right? You can't really grasp it. So it probably would be a rather weak treaty, but we see other international treaties that don't have a verification mechanism in place at the moment, bioweapons, for example, and it still works mostly. Also, I think picking up on what Alexander said, it is a security interest of states to have a regulation in place to avoid this increasing speed of warfare that might lead to escalation in the conventional or nuclear realm. It will also be maybe necessary to update existing treaties and regulations and include AI capabilities or autonomous functions in there for, what to do about these, for example, in the nuclear weapon debate. And also an argument that is often tied to this is, well, if we have a regulation, then we can't use all the military advantages. Our opponent will do it, and then we have a problem. Well, I would say we should be interested in at least the bare minimum of international humanitarian law, and that's not that much, to be honest. And having a regulation on autonomy in weapon systems is really, at least in the current discussion, it's really just setting this bare minimum of IHL, and states should strive to do this and in the design, development, and use of their weapon systems. Knowing that is quite a naive statement at the moment, maybe. I will leave them, maybe hand over to Laurent.
Thank you. I very much echo and agree with what has been done by Alexander and Anja, in particular with regard to the fact that we can't wait that every single state agree. That's the end of a long process of ratification of treaties after they have been negotiated. That can't be the starting point. The starting point, of course, is the willingness to address the issue, and that has been demonstrated in the CCW and now through also the UNGA resolution, and then take the steps to move towards negotiations. But universalization comes only after a long process and should certainly not stop us from moving forward. Otherwise, we never do. Now, I think it's also important to realize, and history and previous disarmament treaties demonstrate that, is that treaties have influence, treaties that prohibits or restrict the use of or the development and use of weapons have effects even in states that have decided for a reason or another not to ratify it. It has effects in terms of setting a global norm on the issue that might influence the policies of states. And we have seen states that are not parties to treaties that adopt policies that align fully or to a large extent to the treaty, even if they have not ratified it. it has influence to the industry that we were discussed earlier, with industry withdrawing from developing some weapons just because the market is too small, because a number of the international community have prohibited that weapon, and therefore no longer want to use it. And when it's done preventively, to come back to that, it has the best influence. I know it's not comparable in the sense that autonomy can be used in every weapon systems, and in that sense, it sees as a sort of strategy capability, which is not at all the case of blinding laser weapons. But as I have mentioned that example several times, today, after 40 years, it is ratified only by half the states in the world. Nevertheless, nobody has developed blinding laser weapons because that's the norm that the international community agrees, and nobody developed it. So it has effect even when it's not universally ratified. So let's not be blocked by the arguments that it needs to be universal agreement before, otherwise we will never move forward, and we will not be able to address the urgent humanitarian, legal, and ethical concerns that the trajectory of the development of autonomous weapons systems is put in front of us.
Great, thank you. So to follow up on that, I think that would be our perhaps last question, but in some regard, you already addressed it, the need to put in rules in place. But it's there are some questions in the Q&A asking about the specificity of the treaty and how to make sure that it stays current, considering that it's dealing with something that is technologically advancing very fast. And so I would be happy to hear from all three speakers on that. Wants to go first? Anja, please.
Yeah, so I will at least start. So first of all, I think this question really shows the importance of focusing on the human role in a potential regulation. Some people call it technology agnostic or whatever. So don't define what you mean by AI and other enabling technologies, but define what the human is supposed to do in the military decision-making process. So in the choice, in the selection and engagement of targets, in the killing of people and destroying objects, basically. And that's really at the core of the discussion, and that's independent on what technology can do, because in the end, the human is always has to be accountable and responsible for what's happening. So that should be the focus, and that solves at least a few issues with that. Apart from that, I would say that any form of regulation should be accompanied maybe by an advisory board of experts who stay up to date with technology and can tell where maybe adjustments are necessary, where code of conduct and things like that should be adjusted. So I think there are a few options.
Thank you. Alexander, please.
Thanks. Yes, I think it's of course an absolutely valid point. The technology is moving forward very quickly, and it would be very difficult to define exactly weapons, autonomous weapon systems. So I think what has been discussed and is being discussed in the GGE is the sort of functional approach, and I think that is the way to move forward. What we have tried, what Austria has tried to promote is an idea that human control over critical functions would require an adequate functional understanding of what the system does, the understanding of the circumstances that will trigger the application of force, and then to be able to trace back the outcome to sort of human agency. That's one aspect. Then to assess the context in which an autonomous weapon system would be used, which would include to evaluate the circumstances and conditions and the environment, and then to be able to limit the duration and the geographical area in which the system is to be used. So there are ways to to define the functions which would then apply to every future weapon, which we don't know right now what they are going to be like, but to define the functions and the role that human agency needs to be kept. I think that might be a way to do it. It's probably very challenging to put this into legal text, but I think it's much better to do it that way than to try to define weapons when it's absolutely clear that maybe in 3 months' time things will have moved on. But we think, and I think that's also something that has gained a lot of traction in the GE discussions, that it would be possible to do it in this sort of functional approach way.
Thank you. As a chaser to that, before I turn to Laurent, and maybe he can address that. So we talk about this sort of the system that can autonomously identify and engage the target. But what about the recent examples where AI is being used to identify targets, to help identify targets, and then there's a human still kind of pushing the button, so to say. But there are some terrible sort of judgments built into this AI's assistance that the human pushing the button did not eliminate that problem. Is that something that could also be covered under this treaty, or do you think that's a separate issue that goes towards the broader kind of use of AI in military domain?
Thank you to enable me to develop on that. I think it's better to keep it separate. Indeed, it raises issues that some of which may be similar, notably, autonomous weapon systems and AI in decision support systems raise issues that and concerns that may be similar, but the answer is not necessarily the same. And as we are talking about definitions, that's two completely different definitions in the sense that AI in decision support system by its very name is not autonomous, or at least is not meant to be autonomous. Now, indeed, it raises concern with regards to retaining human control over the use of force if the human who takes the decision relies with too much of an automation bias on the input of the AI, and it's only nominal decision by the human that rely too much on and trust too much the AI system. But definitionally speaking, that would confuse the matter even more. So I would really urge that to keep the two discussions separate. And coming to definitions, I agree with both Alexander and Anja that the definition should be linked to the function. And that's what we also have proposed in our recommendations and now in our submissions to the Secretary General, going to propose specific wording that could be used to try to define that in a manner that we hope would still be valid and useful 20 years from now or 50 years from now, even regardless of the technological development. And to take one of the examples, or a few of the examples that we recommend, that's linked to the type of targets that would be to which autonomous weapons would be limited, whether that's prohibiting anti-personnel autonomous weapon systems. That does not depend on the technology. As I was saying before, anti-personnel mines fulfill the understanding that is given in the CW of what is an autonomous weapon system. And very advanced AI system might also be anti-personnel. That doesn't matter with the technology if you look at the function they have, which is to target human beings. That will remain valid. Same for all recommendations to limit autonomous weapon systems that are not prohibited, but to limit those that target military objective by nature. That makes a link to the IHL definition of military objective that can be by nature, by use, by purpose, or by location. And military objective by nature as those that are typically military objects, missiles, tanks, fighter jets, etc., etc. So typical military objects. If that's the target, how the autonomous weapon function doesn't affect that definition or that restrictions. The question of understandability that Alexander also mentioned, we view it as critical. Of course, what system will be predictable and how we can understand that will evolve. But the criteria that it must be predictable for the user, that criteria will remain regardless of the technology, and that's what is key. Of course, it will change what system can fulfill the criteria, but the criteria and the legal limits, it must be predictable. And the effects of the weapon system must be predictable by the user that can remain. So voilà, we have proposed wording in that respect to try to support states in advancing towards such regulation and showing that despite the conceptual difficulties, we believe it's possible to do that through clearly defined definitions and prohibitions and restrictions.
Thank you very much. An exhaustive answer. And we're coming to the end of our allotted time, but I just wanted to give a chance to the speakers to say in a couple of words in 1 minute if you have any kind of concluding thoughts that you want to leave us with. But really briefly, sort of a 1 minute sprint. Okay, we'll go maybe from Laurent to Alexander to Anja.
I don't want to add anything more in terms of substance. I've discussed enough, but just an encouragement to every state and other entities that might be invited to go to the conference in Vienna. We view that as a very important conference, or the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross will also be there with some colleagues. So please don't hesitate to go there if you're a state or another entity interested by those matters.
Thank you. Alexander, now that Laurent covered your part, what would you say?
No, yes, thank you very much, Laurent. I fully agree with what you just said. Just to underscore that the point I tried to make is that this is not really a technical issue, but it's a huge issue for all of us, for humanity, and we need a much more intense and broader discussion, societal discussion about this issue. So we hope that the conference in Vienna and then the UN report will contribute to that. The registration deadline is still open for another 3 days. So there are still a few places that I think we could allocate, and I hope to see some of you at the conference in Vienna. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Anja, please.
Yes, thank you. So maybe just one final point. When the process in the CCW started, it was really a question of preventive arms control mostly. That changed rapidly. We are seeing autonomous weapon systems being developed, left, front, and center. Basically, we are seeing incredible AI capabilities being applied in current conflicts, potential leading to huge military advantages, but also huge civilian casualties. So it's really a pressing issue, and states have to act on this. There's not much time to, discuss what is autonomous weapon systems, but really, moving on with this. And I have high hopes for the conference in Vienna, and looking forward to meeting quite a few people there and keep discussing that issue. And also, thank you very much for the excellent questions in the chat. I'm really sorry that we didn't get to all of them. So if you want, people from the chat want to contact me and probably also the other two, please do so. I'm happy to keep discussing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a great way to conclude the substantive part. And indeed, if you are, I apologize, we couldn't get to all the questions in the Q&A. And if you really want us to channel your question to a particular speaker, do send us an email. We'll forward the questions. And our webinar today was recorded, and the recording and the report will be on the VCDNP website soon. And with that, I'm very grateful to all of you and our speakers for joining us today, and great presentations and great questions. Until next time, thank you.